I'll just start, with the obvious
Yeah,
question
of
about
course.
your role. It's in this position as the CEO of Premiership Women's Rugby. If you can just tell me about yourself and the what current role entails.
Yes, so I joined Premiership Women's Rugby, or Premier 15s as it was then, back in January 2003, as employee number one. And Premiership Women's Rugby is a new company set up to run what was Premier 15s, which used to be wholly owned and run by the RFU, the governing body for rugby in this country. And a bit like other sports are doing, football are also following our same example, and netball are doing something similar. We've decided to help us grow and build the women's domestic league in this country. That the right way to do that was to set it up as an independent company. Although I'm responsible to 10 shareholders, which are my 9 clubs and the RFU as well. So I have a board and a group of shareholders that I'm answerable to. And basically we run domestic women's rugby in this country, which is a 9-team league. So we play 18 rounds a year and then semi-finals and finals. And we also have a cup competition that runs alongside that too. But no, my background started off in broadcast. I was at the BBC as a producer for 13 years before I moved away from there. And then I was lucky enough to join Team GB for under 2012, which was fantastic. And over my career, I've been lucky enough to work on 8, in fact, winter and summer games. So I'm a big fan of the Olympics and very excited about Paris starting next week. And then after 2012, I moved into agency life, and then I moved into golf, and I spent 5 brilliant years working for what is now the DP World Tour, first in partnership management, and then on our relationship with the PGA Tour through all the highs and lows of the Live Golf saga. So no, it's been an interesting career, and I think what's been good is that background in sort of broadcasting, sponsorship, in partnership management, stakeholder management has been really helpful in my present role. So lots of experience gained from a slightly wiggly line, I suppose, of career progression. But it's been lots of fun.
That's amazing. I mean, you have traversed across multiple sports. And if I can ask you about rugby, especially women in rugby, and the interest, how much has, it has increased over the years? If I were to ask you, whether it's broadcast, viewership, fan engagement, etc., do you see a considerable amount of rise in the numbers?
Yeah, I think, look, I think it's always a case of women's sport, particularly, is around visibility. And I think the England team, the Red Roses, have done an amazing job to drive that visibility. The Six Nations is now shown on network TV on BBC, BBC One and BBC Two, and that really helps to drive that visibility and awareness. So people, that oft-used expression, if you can see it, you can be it. So I think that as the game continues to grow awareness, as we start to build superstars like Ellie Kildunn, who's just going out to the Paris Olympics to play sevens, and Marley Packer, the England captain, we're starting to build slowly great players that people are starting to recognise and people start to follow and to engage with. So I think it's absolutely on the rise. And without doubt, the Women's World Cup, which is being played in England in 2025, so next August, will be a huge jump off point for that. It's generally considered that it will be a pivotal moment for the sport. Hopefully England will do well. I mean, you never want to preempt these things, but hopefully they'll go well. And it has the opportunity to be our Lionesses moment. So there's huge excitement about what the opportunity looks like ahead.
Wow, I think we can use one of those opportunities like the Lionesses, I'm sure. Moving on, I've seen recently Premiership Women's Rugby has partnered with a lot of stakeholders, commercial partnership. There have been Gilbert, for example, was a very recent one which you guys recently partnered. If you can just tell me about what's the commercial and marketing strategy for Premiership Women's Rugby and what kind of commercial partners, brands, etc., have come on board and are supporting the sport and the league.
I think it's a really interesting question. So as you alluded to, we've just signed a new deal with Gilbert, which is fantastic. They are a world leader in what they do. We've just signed a really strong new deal with them for the next few years, and we're delighted to do so. And there's a number of other deals on the table, which I'd love to be able to tell you about, but for appropriate confidentiality reasons, I can't. But yeah, so there's a lot of things going on. I think there's a really interesting challenge, and I speak to a lot of other women's sports. So I speak to football and cricket and netball and others on a very regular basis. I think there's still a disconnect with women's sport. There's some really punchy headlines around women's sport being worth 1 billion, by 2030. But I still think there's a lot of goodwill. There's undoubtedly a lot of goodwill towards women's sport, but I think it's still a challenge for women's sports brands to convert that into hard cash. I think partly because sport is still seen through very traditional metrics. So it's ROI, broadcast ROI, it's merch sales, and the market for women's sport is smaller. So that's inevitably brands go, well, it's not worth as much, which of itself is fine, but equally, that sort of pat on the head and, oh, you're doing a really nice job here. That's great, but it doesn't fund itself. So I think there's still a bit of a disconnect between brands talking a good game about supporting women's sport and actually putting cash on the table. And I think one of the things we continue to work with lots of partners on is that sort of reevaluation of metrics. Because actually what we do know about women's sport is it has a highly engaged audience. So if you're a consumer brand, particularly, for example, we know that our audience tends to be quite female. It tends to be a lot of mums, and they're often the decision makers in a household. So we know we have that engagement and spending power. So I think it's just converting that, and those are just different ways for people to look at sport. And I guess a lot of CMOs in businesses are still using those traditional metrics, and that makes it more of a challenge.
Are we seeing a lot of, girls taking up rugby now more than ever? Would you say that's the scenario?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the RFU are committed to getting 100,000 women and girls playing rugby in the next couple of years. And I think there's about 50,000 now. So, they're doing an amazing job. And I say the World Cup is on the horizon. So the numbers continue to grow. And I think you're starting to see it being played more often in girls' schools. Up until now, that's been a real challenge because it wasn't played in girls' schools as much. So I think, that helps as well. So I think that visibility, again, really helps to drive engagement with people having a go at it. And certainly, I know from watching girls play, it's great for mental health. That physical contact actually is a really important part of the game.
I think, yes, you mentioned about the physical and mental side of the game, and it is a combat sport, so you need to be tough, etc. So, do we have any sort of grassroots program where you're trying to organize, maybe say like a summer camp and things like that? Are we doing those grassroots activities as well to probably advance
Absolutely.
numbers?
No, absolutely. And they happen all over the country. And you can either find them through the RFU website or through your local rugby club. There's lots of opportunities to take up the game. And I think it's an interesting point you make that we launched our season last year with a campaign we called Powered Differently, which very much was highlighting that actually rugby is a sport for everyone. So you talk about people necessarily being physically strong. Depends where you're playing on the pitch. We need fast players. We need strong players. We need all sorts of different skills to make up a rugby 15. So what's great about this sport, perhaps more so than almost any other women's team sport, is that actually it doesn't matter what your size, what your shape, what your sexuality is, your ethnicity is. There is a place on the pitch for absolutely everyone. From the front row to the speedy wings on the outside, that it's a sport that encompasses absolutely everybody. And I think that's a really important point to make. And I think it's a really important part of the game.
My last question to you is, obviously the World Cup is coming up, and before that, what sort of innovations have you planned when it comes to competition? Will there be sort of a league which you're planning to, do, or how are you increasing the competitions for players to maybe participate more and sort of innovate a little in terms of competitions as well?
So we are responsible for the top league, if you like, for Premiership Women's Rugby. There's obviously the RFU themselves, the governing body, sort of manage those leagues that sit underneath us. But I think what's really important is that we create a showcase that women and girls can see what they can aspire to. We've done a TV deal with TNT. We had 4 games on BBC Digital this year. That visibility continues to grow. And I think that's the most important thing. But also the standard of rugby on the pitch gets better and better each year. We've got some really talented players. The spectacle continues to grow. And I think we see that because the TV numbers are rising. The numbers of spectators in our grounds are rising. And I think, I think it's a really exciting opportunity for the sport over the next 18 months to really use that World Cup spotlight as a springboard for success.
Thank you so much, Belinda. I think I've asked most of the questions I wanted to. If there's
Okay.
anything you want to add or maybe just tell me about which I might have missed out, it would be wonderful.
No, I think we've talked, we obviously talked about Power Differently, which I think is really important to us. And we have some key sort of tentpole moments in the year. We have our Superpower weekend, which takes place on a fallow weekend in the Men's Six Nations. So there's no men's rugby that weekend. So we are the star of that weekend. So, and we broadcast all 4 matches live that weekend, which is really exciting. So I think there's lots of, really good stuff coming up through women's rugby now. I think it's a sport on the rise, and I think what we really want to do is encourage brands to get involved now while the opportunity exists, to be part of that story. So rather than waiting until the story happens and go, oh, look, this looks interesting, what we really want to do is find some amazing brands that want to come on that journey with us. And I think that's the conversations we're having with people at the minute. And I hope, those are successful conversations in the next few weeks.
But I think that's a generic problem with the brands when it comes to, women's sports. They always want to sponsor you when you've already reached a certain level. And what we want is a push at the grassroots, or at the bottom of the pyramid, not
At the
when we are
developing
already on.
level, yeah. We
And
need sports to
yes.
come on the journey, brands to come on the journey with us.
So are those conversations tough sometimes? Maybe because because I've spoken to a lot of people across who work in women's sports, and they're always like, we start a conversation with a particular brand, and then it's sort of like, okay, we'll see. And so the conversion rate is actually very less when still, I mean, despite the viewership number, the fan engagement, the kind of popularity, not just rugby, but, football, etc. receiving. So do you also face similar problems?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is still a tough sell. As I said, there's lots of goodwill towards women's sport, which is brilliant and really important too. But I think it's converting that goodwill into something more tangible that still continues to be the challenge. And you still have brands, which isn't, it's not a bad thing, but we're still quite often put into CSR budgets, which I say, we'll we'll take the money whichever way it comes. But actually, we are more than a charitable organisation. We are actually, these are professional or semi-professional athletes, and this is really important, and we need to resource it, and we need to support it, to the utmost.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ben. It was lovely speaking with you. Like I have worked with BBC as well. So it's
So
amazing to meet someone. And thank you, Paul. I don't know if Paul is there.
I'll drop him a note afterwards.
All right. Thank you so much. And
No
I'll do
worries.
the recording and writing it up. Thank you so much. It's
Okay,
lovely speaking
brilliant.
with you. Bye
Thanks
bye.
so much. Take care. Bye bye.